Just wanted to provide a quick briefing of what went on in the Judiciary Committee today. We heard 10 bills. 2 of those were Democrat bills, the rest were Republican bills. 3 of those bills had to do with condemnation proceedings or eminent domain. Obviously, that's an important issue and something that we've heard a lot about in the interim. So protecting property owners and their rights is something that's very important to the entire House. Every single one of the bills that we passed today passed unanimously, and none of them failed. I'm just going to quickly go through those bills and give you a very brief explanation about the subject matter. The first one's House Bill 2276, which is authored by Lee Denny, and that has to do with pipeline right-of-ways and the location of those, and actually provides, I would say, greater power to the property owner to protest the location of that right-of-way. And again, that's limited to pipelines. There is some objection by the industry to this bill, and so this is probably what we would define a work in progress, and I think that came out clearly in the committee setting with the members promising to work with one another on some of the objections that they have. Secondly was House Bill 2305, which was authored by Representative Chris Kennedy, and that has to do with requiring affidavits of merit and counterclaim, negligence counterclaim cases. Of course, part of the tort reform legislation that was passed several years ago required this type of affidavit to be filed whenever there was some sort of negligence claim, and this just simply clarifies that when there's some sort of counterclaim or cross-claim, that will also be the case, and that passed unanimously. Next would be House Bill 2395, which was presented by Representative Emily Virgin, but authored by Representative Ben Shearer, and this has to do with really just cleaning up the succession and heirship statute. House Bill 2486 was presented by Representative Scooter Park, and this had to do with railroads and requiring comparable sales when we're talking about, again, condemnation and considering what the fair market value would be. And so, again, this is something that is property owner friendly and changes the appraisal process. There was also House Bill 2501, which was authored by Representative Pfeiffer and presented by Representative Biggs, and this amends the workers' compensation statute to make sure that volunteer firefighters are covered not just when they're fighting fires, but also when they're working on the equipment and the vehicles, because, of course, that can be very dangerous work. House Bill 2520, which I authored in working with the Department of Health and Human Services, and this simply updates our child support guidelines and specifically making sure that we are in line with the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act to make sure that we continue to receive federal support when it comes to our child support enforcement efforts. We also passed HB 2723, authored by Representative Emily Virgin out of Norman, and this is a bill that we passed last year, but because of procedural issues got caught up, and this will allow recoveries by minors in, say, a friendly suit setting to actually deposit that judgment into a 529 college savings plan. So again, the way it is now, there are restrictions on the use of that money, and this will provide some flexibility, again, if there's court approval, to go ahead and put this in a college savings plan. There was also the presentation and approval unanimously of House Bill 2936, and that was authored by Representative McCullough, and he's going to talk about that here in a little bit. It also had to do with condemnation proceedings and working with the Department of Transportation, and I think what's interesting about that is we were able to have a representative from ODOT speak, and he said that of the 1,100 or so property acquisitions by ODOT last year, only about 10% of those were through the condemnation proceedings. So again, it's not a large number. We want to make sure that we're protecting Oklahoma landowners throughout that process. 2 more, House Bill 2965 by Representative Nelson, and that has to do with a right to a civil action being filed by a child who is affected by some sort of retaliation or discharge as it relates to the reporting of abuse or neglect. And then finally, and one of the most interesting bills of the day, is House Bill 3024 by Representative J.P. Jordan. This has to do with catfishing. And no, that does not have to do with noodling, but it does have to do with Googling. And what that is somebody stealing someone's identity, essentially online, and then using that for fraudulent purposes. And so this actually makes the action a little more streamlined, and so that somebody can recover when their identity has been compromised through what's known as catfishing.
About 5 or 6 years ago, I looked into the condemnation process, made some observations, thought we might have seen a problem or two with some potential excessive litigation in relation to it, how it related to contract attorneys. Didn't go anywhere. We just let it lay. A few years later, the state chamber had a member come up with a complaint. So I'm the usual suspect. I'm the guy who had worked it in the past. So they approached me to revive it. Settled down a little bit since then, so I didn't come out swinging. I actually called ODOT, and we had a couple of good meetings back during session, and we set up an interim study. Really reached out to ODOT, and they responded. We brought in some of the aggrieved parties, and we sat down and had several meetings again, including an interim study, whereby we asked for a lot of information, a lot of data, which ODOT had not really done before, but they dug in and they actually looked at their condemnation data. And as Chairman had pointed out, they looked at the number of cases that were settled. They looked at the number of cases filed. They looked at, and we asked specifically, how many in the last 5 years have you taken to trial? How many have you won? How many have you lost? How many have gone up in appeal? How many where were your attorney's fees granted, et cetera, et cetera. And we got some really good information on that. So the concern was, are there a small number of cases where there might have been some overly aggressive litigation? And should it maybe have stopped earlier in the process? Because, the state has a lot of power. And even in a small number of cases, it can really, really be punitive and harm the landowner. And as you've seen, we had 3 bills that were dealing with this. So there's a lot of sensitivity in relation to the state coming in and using this very, very important, this very potent power to come in and take someone's land. So we want to be very careful about how we use that. Very impressed with how ODOT responded. They're going to be doing basically an executive review where not the legal staff, but the executive staff is going to come in and oversee the review of all of their active cases right now to make sure that they're not missing anything on what might be settled or how they're treating their condemnees, and just do an active review of all the cases. They're going to start using data more. They're going to start actually taking a look at their data a little deeper to try to mine that. They're also going to bring in a consultant, look at how other states do it, look at maybe they're missing something, try to find more best practices. So I was really, really pleased with how that went. And of course, we took some ideas from some of the other bills that were brought in. One of them was maybe looking at using a different standard for what ODOT picks when they're looking at the commissioners and the valuation of the property from the get-go. In fact, that was raised back during the summer, and another one of our members, Scooter Parks, brought that issue up again. So that's a little synopsis of what we've been working on. Hopefully, we'll be able to make quite a bit of progress, and if you'll get us some good, solid answers to some of these questions that our citizens have been raising. Thank you very much.
One anecdotal story for most of you that weren't here back in the old days, Judiciary, we had all lawyers on it. I think we had like 23. Representative Calvi was there, Representative Teray, and anybody that went through Judiciary was like going through a lumber buzzsaw. But today was more congenial, but I suspect as the days heat up, it'll get a little more controversial. But all of the bills today had good policy initiatives, and that's why it was a fairly good meeting. Thank you.